Have you ever woken up at 3 in the morning and your mind is suddenly acting like the building's on fire? Nothing happened. The room's quiet, the house is quiet, no one's yelling, no emergency alert went off, your life is not actively exploding, and yet your mind has chosen that exact moment to hold a full executive meeting on every problem you've ever had. Now it wants to review your finances, your relationships, that weird thing you said 11 years ago, three future disasters that have not yet happened. And for range, childhood. A lot of people know this experience, right? You wake up, the mind starts moving, and because it happens so often, people start assigning huge meaning to the hour. I did. At one point in my life, waking at 3 a.m. felt so consistent, I thought this has to mean something important. And in a sense, it does. But not in the way most people think. Because I don't think 3 a.m. is a magical cursed hour. I don't think the hour itself is the problem. I think 3 a.m. reveals what the daytime lets you avoid, and that one distinction changes the whole night. So let's start with the mistake people usually make. In my 20s, I came up with all kinds of explanations. Maybe something terrible happened in that hour in another life. Maybe it was past life trauma. Maybe something dark was moving through the field. Maybe the hour itself meant danger. And when the mind starts filling in the blanks like that, it doesn't calm down. It gets busier. And then later in life, when I had my studio in the 90s, the explanation became less mystical and more practical. Honestly, it felt worse. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning and instantly start running the numbers and doom scenarios. Studio rent, lease payments, overhead. What if work slows down? What if the clients stop calling? What if this month is the month everything starts slipping? That kind of pressure trains the mind to scan, to anticipate, to rehearse, to run every crack in the future before the future gets here. And once I was awake, that was it. No drifting back to sleep, no soft reset. The body was in bed, but the system was fully online. So at that point, I thought 3 a.m. meant something spiritual. At another point, I thought it meant something catastrophic. But both interpretations made the same mistake. They made the hour the cause. And that is where the distortion begins. But that is only the first layer, because the next part matters even more. The other night, I woke up at 3 in the morning again. Same darkness, same quiet, same first disoriented thought. Why am I awake? But this time something was different. The mind didn't get to take the whole moment. I could feel movement, but it did not feel like panic. It didn't feel like doom, and it didn't feel like an emergency. It felt like a pull, a direction. Something in me was becoming easier to feel. And the second I recognized that, the whole system just softened. Within about a minute, I was asleep again. Same hour, completely different experience. And that's important, because if the exact hour can produce a completely different inner state, then the hour is not the issue. 3 a.m. is not the problem. 3 a.m., though, is the reveal. And once that becomes clear, a better question begins to open. So what is the hour actually revealing? During the day, your system has competition, noise, screens, tasks, conversations, deadlines, movement, input, output, obligations. The surface layers stay fully occupied. Even when something deeper is already moving, the day gives you enough distraction to stay on the surface. But at night, especially in those quiet hours, most of that just falls away. The body's still, the room is quiet, the world has backed off, the usual noise drops. And when the outer noise drops, what is already present becomes easier to feel. That doesn't mean one thing, it can mean several things. And this is where people tend to lump everything together. Sometimes what rises is backlog, things you never really processed during the day, conversations you didn't finish internally, pressure you carried but never metabolized, emotion that got postponed because the day just kept moving along. Sometimes what rises is real pressure. And it's not symbolism or fantasy, real things your system knows it's carrying. Money, work, health, relationship strain, something unfinished that your body knows is important. Sometimes what rises is mental overfunction, the mind trying to get ahead of uncertainty by thinking faster. And sometimes this is the part often misread. What rises is orientation. Not anxiety, not panic, but orientation. something deeper becoming easier to feel because interference has dropped. The soul is not suddenly louder at 3 a.m., the world is quieter. And when the world gets quieter, what has been there all along becomes harder to ignore. And that is why the experience can feel so charged, because several things can show up in the same window: backlog, pressure, mental noise, and direction. And if you don't know the difference, the mind lumps them all together and calls it danger. And that clears a lot. But it still doesn't explain why direction gets mistranslated so fast. And this is where I think a lot of people get trapped, because the soul moves through direction. The mind moves through management. And those are not the same language. The soul doesn't arrive as a checklist or a spreadsheet, and it doesn't arrive screaming instructions into your forehead. It feels like a pull, a pressure without panic, a steady insistence, or a direction signal. But the mind hears movement and translates it into a workload. That is the distortion. A pull becomes a task, a direction becomes a problem, a signal becomes urgency. And once the mind does that, it starts grouping. Now it's not one thing, now it's everything. The one thing you felt turns into 15 things you need to solve. The direction turns into a life review. A simple signal becomes an internal emergency briefing. And that is why people often think they're feeling fear when what they are actually feeling is movement being mistranslated by a busy system. Now that distinction is more important than most people realize, because direction is not demand, and that one line changes the whole night. Direction is not demand. Just because something is becoming easier to feel doesn't mean it needs to be executed before sunrise. Just because something matters doesn't mean it needs immediate management. Just because something is true doesn't mean it's an emergency. And once you let that sink in, the whole internal climate starts to change. So now the question becomes, what do you actually do in that moment? When I wake up now, I don't start with the story. See, that's the key shift. I don't start by asking, what does this mean? What is wrong? What am I forgetting? Or what disaster am I supposed to prevent right now? I start somewhere much simpler. I just ask, what in me is tight right now? That question changes the night because it moves me out of narration into contact. Where is the contraction? Where is the bracing? Where is the body already preparing for the problem? Usually if you catch it early enough, you can feel the system gearing up before the full mental spiral begins. Right? In the chest, the gut, the jaw, the throat, your breath, something is already tightening. And that's important because once you find the contraction, you are no longer fully trapped in the story. Then comes the second question, and for me, this is the one that changes everything. Is this asking for action right now? Or is this simply showing me direction? And that question is gold, because those are not the same experience. If something truly needs action right now, fine, that is clear. But most of the time, in those quiet hours, what is present is not a call for immediate action. It's a signal, it's an orientation, a reveal. Something is becoming easier to feel because the field is quieter. And that doesn't require me to solve my life at 3:07 in the morning. It requires recognition. And that's different. Yes, I can feel what it points to. No, I don't need to turn it into a task right now. That is the moment the urgency starts to fall apart. That is the moment the system stops turning the night into a battleground. And that is exactly where most people reach for breath. But even that has an order to it. A lot of people reach for breath immediately. Now, breath is powerful. I use it, and it's an important tool. But breath is not always the first move. See, think of it this way. The reframe is the first move. The breath seals it. Because if the mind is still calling the whole experience an emergency, then using breath too early can feel like trying to calm down while the inner alarm system is still screaming that something is wrong. That is why people say, I tried breathing, and it didn't work. Valid. Sometimes it didn't work because the system hadn't changed its interpretation yet. You were still in crisis, and just breathing on top of it, that's like mopping the floor while the hose is still on. Useful, maybe. Efficient? No. So the first move is turning off the hose. Nothing has to be solved right now. This may be backlog. This may be pressure. This may be mental noise. This may be direction. But it's not automatically an emergency. And once that's absorbed, now the body can actually receive a calming instruction. Then the breath works. 4 seconds in, 8 seconds out. And if you can, 2 seconds of absolute stillness. No force, no drama, no trying to win against your own nervous system. Now the breath is not fighting panic. It is sealing a shift that has already begun. So then the body softens, the bracing eases, the mind stops accelerating, and sleep can return naturally. That is very different from trying to breathe your way through a system that still believes the building is on fire. That changes the method. But the deeper shift is what it changes in your relationship with the night. For me, the real shift wasn't that I stopped waking at 3 a.m. The shift was that waking at 3 a.m. stopped meaning the same thing. It stopped automatically meaning something is wrong, I need to figure this out now. Or I'm in danger. I can't rest until I solve this. Right? Now it means something is easier to feel right now. And that's a radically different relationship with the night. Because once you understand that the quiet hours reveal rather than create, you stop adding unnecessary fear to what is already happening. And when you stop adding fear, clarity becomes a lot easier. Sometimes what becomes clear is simple. You are carrying more than you admitted during the day. And sometimes what becomes clear is practical. There's a real pressure point in your life you need to address. Sometimes what becomes clear is relational. There is something in you that knows a shift is needed. And sometimes what becomes clear is directional. More this, less that. Yes, no, not now, pay attention. Not always a revelation, not always a cosmic download. Sometimes just a cleaner sense of what is true. And that is enough. And that brings us to the most important part. So if you wake up at 3 in the morning and your mind starts racing, don't begin with the story. Start with the tension. What in me is tight right now? And then ask, is this asking for action right now? Or is it simply showing me direction? Because the quiet hours don't create the signal. They reveal what was already moving beneath the noise of the day. Sometimes that's backlog. Sometimes it is pressure. Sometimes it's mental overfunction. Sometimes it's a deeper orientation becoming easier to feel. But the soul itself remains steady, always. The real difference is whether the human system translates that movement into clarity or into emergency. And the less you turn the night into a crisis, the easier it becomes to let it settle. So here's one more piece of this. Waking at 3 a.m. does not only have to be something you manage, it can become insight. Because when the body feels safe, the mind stops competing so hard. And when the mind stops competing, deeper guidance becomes easier to feel. That is the shift. Not shutting the mind down, not forcing an answer, not trying to solve your whole life in the dark. Just easing the system enough that nothing inside is fighting for dominance. And in that kind of quiet, guidance becomes easier to recognize. Not always as a big revelation, not always as some dramatic spiritual movement. Sometimes it's simpler. Yes, no, more this, less that. You already know. Pay attention tomorrow. And if what becomes clear is that something in your life is off course, you don't need to solve it at 3 in the morning. You can simply hold the orientation. Show me more clearly over the next few days. That is enough. Then your only job is to stay awake enough during the day to notice what life starts showing you. That is a very different relationship with the night. Now 3 a.m. is not just interruption. It can become a doorway into deeper coherence. The quiet hours do not create the signal. They reveal what the soul has been orienting all along.